Let's Get To presents
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Go, go, Astros! Here come the Astros, burning with desire. Here come the Astros, breathing orange fire. Here come the Astros, with winning on their mind. Here come the Astros, number one every time. Go, go, Astros!
We want Houston! We want Houston!
For the second time in 6 years, the Astros are baseball's best.
And now, Go Astros, a web series dedicated to the two-time world champs from H-Town, presented by three guys who remember Bob Nepper. And welcome back to Go Astros, your weekly reminder that the Astros are, in fact, World Series champions, though some people seem to have forgotten it already. We got a special guest today. We've got Rob Fontenot from the Astros Baseball Podcast. Rob, how you doing?
I'm doing good, sir. How are you guys?
I'm doing great. We're also joined with Brian Arbor, who got his first snow today.
Yes, indeed. But the good snow where I don't have to shovel it, unfortunately, that means the shoveling stuff is coming soon.
Well, we shovel stuff on this show every week. And Andy, how about you? How you doing?
I mean, it's still crotch sweaty hot here, so must be December.
Yeah, no, it was gross this morning. I mean, I wear a Christmas sweater every day. I'll put my other one back on for this, and it's been pretty rough. All right, Rob, let's take us back to again, just over a month ago. What went through your head when Kyle Tucker caught the foul ball and the Astros were again World Series champions?
It felt pretty awesome. Going through the playoffs, it seemed, I mean, besides the Seattle series, that it was kind of too easy to believe that we were mowing down all these teams. And then it was pretty tough. You know, they won the first game, and then they won the first game over there in Philly. And you're like, wow, are we going to be able to beat these guys over there? And then they just took it. And that Yordan Alvarez home run, me and my wife were recording ourselves for the Kyle Tucker catch, and our celebration was pretty awesome. I had to cut it down to post it, but it was
right.
It was a pretty fun celebration.
You know, it's funny, and I'll open this up to the rest of the panel as well, because you know, if you look back, the series really wasn't, the World Series, all that competitive. I mean, it was the same series. Astros won 4-2, including two of them in Philly, where they're unbeatable. It's just the way you lose game one is what felt to be more competitive than anything. Brian?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of at some level, we owed that to the baseball gods, having won a whole bunch of close games and having stolen game one from Seattle in relatively similar circumstances. And more impressive circumstances, because Jordan had that ball a lot farther than Real Muto did. But, you know, what turned the series is the Astros stopped giving up runs, the same thing that got them through the first 7 games. And they have the no-hitter. They have they hold them to 2 runs with great defense in game 5. And then Fromber in the bullpen absolutely shut them down, 1 run in game 6. Hey, they won this through pitching and defense throughout the season. They won the World Series through pitching and defense. And, you know, that Kyle Tucker has apparently kept the ball and put it in his parents' house right now. But Kyle, you should get that back into your house sooner rather than later.
For all we know, Kyle doesn't
I'm worried that Preston's going to take it from you. Right.
Oh, wow. All right, Andy, what do you think overall? Just how that series played out from the eyeball test.
Because I don't do numbers. It was the series that I think all of us wanted to see in 2019 and again in 2021, and we didn't get. And it was, I think, especially sweet for most Astros fans, because going into that series, yes, 538 and some other sites made us the favorites and said we were the favorites. But if you listen to MLB Tonight and ESPN and your broadcast talk noise, the Phillies were the team of destiny. They were on fire. They were going to hit 15 home runs every game, and there was no chance that the Astros had. Maybe they could scratch out a win here or there. And they would say all that, and then they'd go, well, the Astros probably still win in 7. So the fact that we did dominate the series really outside of 2 games, and game 1 to me is just baseball. It happens. You got to a 10th inning. Somebody stepped up. If it, we felt the same thing going 18 scoreless in Seattle, and Jeremy Pena finally breaks the ice to destroy the Mariners for yet another season, which is just fun. But the World Series was, I think, redemption for the franchise, not for 2017, because we don't need redemption from that, but for falling short in 2019 with maybe the best roster not to win a baseball World Series. And then again in 2021 against the Braves, where we didn't have the pitching to compete.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel obviously the same way. And it's interesting you brought up the talking head thing, because that's going to lead into one of our second topic today. But the first, winter meetings are now over. First of all, the Mets spent all the money. But one of the things is the lack of moves from the Astros. And I wanted to get y'all's take on it, because on the one hand, there was a lack of moves. On the other hand, at least the two guys that I was watching that the Astros were targeting, Contreras and Nimmo, I think went for prices that we would not have felt comfortable with as fans looking for the longevity of the team. Brian, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, so first thing to note is it's not that they didn't make moves, they made moves before the winter meetings. They re-signed Rafael Montero and signed Jose Abreu. So I never went into the winter meetings thinking, oh goodness, I'm not like Blue Jays were like, we got to do something. Aren't we going to do something? They've done that. Second, 5 years for a 30-year-old catcher is, we'll see how that works out sort of in the fifth year. Obviously, people have been sort of getting things there. And again, we've talked about in the show, I'm puzzled by the focus on catcher.
I think we all were, yeah.
Yeah. And continue to be, I'm intrigued to hear sort of parsing through that's been sort of hard to do. And then, one thing I talked about, I wrote something on Substack yesterday, the Astros have sort of a understood rule that they won't offer more than 5 years in free agency. And they've rarely gone beyond that. So, I didn't think they were going to sign Nimmo anyway, but it went up to 8 years. You really know why they're not going to sign him for that. On the other hand, as many as contracts have gotten longer this off season, it'll be interesting to see if the Astros front office sticks to the 5-year plan, to the 5-year rule, or they have to adjust that as values are changing. We shall see.
Rob, overall, what was your take on just winter meetings and not getting to have one of those sexy, splashy moments?
One thing that the casual fan, I think the four of us are a little above that. Every season, it's the same thing. When are they going to sign? Because you see all these guys going to, like, where's holes? We don't have holes. We have a third baseman. We have a shortstop. We have a second baseman. We got Abreu. A lot of people say we need an outfielder. Is Chas McCormick the guy? I don't know. Like Orange Fire said, what's the focus on catcher? Maybe it's to get someone after Maldonado. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the Instagram story was true for Maldonado. Seems like he's a little upset that they're trying to get a catcher, but I don't know if that's true or not. I just saw it on Twitter, but I'm okay with it. I think they did a good job getting Montero right away, because when I listed the free agents on, that we were going to have this year, I said, that's the number one guy you got to go get, because you're not going to get JV. They could have. You saw the contract he signed. We could have got him. It was that third year is the reason they didn't get him, and I hope I'm not jumping the gun on that, but we could have done that because the third year was a performance-based. He had to pitch 140 innings in the second year, so I thought that was something we could have done. But do we need him? We went to the World Series without him. He's got 1 win and 10 World Series starts or something around that number. I don't know. Overall, I think we did pretty good. But these contracts, these guys, 11 years and $280 million, 11 years, they're not going to do that, and I'm fine with that.
Andy?
I mean, I think logically the Astros front office is going to have to adjust to the market at some point at some time. That's not this year, though, and it may not be next year. We don't really have a crisis of roster until 24 when Altuve's contract is up, and I guess Bregman's contract is up the year after that. And those are guys, I think Altuve is one of these guys, and I don't pretend to be in Jim Crane's head or whoever the general manager ends up being. Altuve is going to be offered a contract for whatever he wants that contract to be, for probably whatever length he wants it to be. I think he's one of those guys like Biggio and Bagwell that is going to be permanently tied to this franchise. I think Bregman has that opportunity, but it's really up to him and I guess Reagan and their kid about where they want to be, what they want to do, what other experiences they want to have potentially in 3 seasons. The Astros are going to have to adjust more, in my mind, because we have this gap of prospects coming up. And again, for the group that says the Astros receive no punishment, being a team without the Yankees or Dodgers TV contract, you do have to be smart with roster development and developing guys through the minor leagues. When you lose 2 consecutive years of first and second round draft picks, you will have a hole in your development process. You will have a hole in prospects coming up. And I think we're going to see that in the next couple of years. The Astros have been extremely lucky because they have hit on Jeremy Pena. They have hit on Kyle Tucker. They have hit on draft picks up and down, really, their draft, but they don't have the number of choices we've talked about in the past. The opportunities are limited. So they really have to get excellent production from whoever they bring up. And I guess the next person or people we're concerned about would be Corey Lee at catcher, and probably Pedro Leon somewhere in the outfield. And I expect to see both of them at some point during the 2023 season, whether it's a cup of coffee or a longer run. But I think Lee got 12 at bats this year. So certainly nothing to give us any indication one way or the other. But when you get to that point and we do have a hole, let's say that we need a right fielder because Tucker goes somewhere else, you might have to go to a 6, 7, 8-year contract. But I expect us to continue to embrace the analytical side of evaluating players. And if we do get to that point, making good use of the dollars and not just, he's the hottest guy on the market, let's get him now. I also expect that we're going to have a balanced team going forward. The Mets got all the headlines because they signed everybody this offseason. I
think that their payroll is almost $500 million.
Right, but they didn't improve their offense at all. They re-signed Nimmo, but everybody else was a pitcher that they've signed. And that's great. They traded out DeGrom for Verlander, but at the end of the day, their offense is what failed them when you got towards it. That's why the Braves were able to overtake them for the NL East. And I don't see that getting better. So they might, win a bunch of games 2-1, but they might lose a bunch of games where they only score 2 runs.
As Brian was famous for saying, 1-run games oftentimes are just luck. And so you're right. If that's your strategy going in, you're leaving a whole lot up to luck.
Yeah. I want to build off Andy's point is if you think about it from what the Astros did this offseason is, hey, the next guy up who seems to be ready for the majors is Hunter Brown. And so you're taking a hit in rotation by going from Verlander to Brown, but that's an area of massive strength and massive depth. And you're taking those resources and putting them to first base. And assuming we sign another outfielder, you're putting them into the outfield. You're putting them into the holes in the offense from 2022. So it's more of that balance that Andy's talking about, that you'd have the offense hopefully coming up, because it's unlikely the pitching will be as good as it was last season because it's just really hard to sustain that level.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting, too, before we move on to the next topic. We talked on our show, Rob, at the beginning of the season, that it's going to be a different kind of Astros team. The strength is going to be the pitching. We're not as deep of a lineup. But I agree, Andy. I think already we're looking at a much more balanced, even team, because I think the starting rotation could be marginally worse, right?
Well,
because your point, but then the offense will be better.
I think pushing, the money to Abreu that we would have given to Verlander in a different world. Abreu doesn't. One of the criticisms of that deal has been that Abreu's power has tailed off. Abreu in our lineup doesn't need to hit 30 home runs. If he hits 15 to 20, but he's on base consistently and he's hitting the ball hard and putting the ball in play, that's what the Astros have built over the last 7 years, is getting guys on base, making contact, not striking out, which Abreu has improved on over the last couple of years. He fits in really, really well. I expect that if we sign another outfielder, which we probably do need another outfielder, at least to challenge Jake Myers for a roster spot, because I'm not in love with that eventuality. It's going to be another guy that doesn't necessarily have to have Michael Conforto power when he's healthy, but a guy who can man multiple outfield positions, put the ball in play, make a lot of contact, and not strike out a lot. That's the profile of the player that we should be looking at. I don't know who that is right now. I don't know if there is a free agent that fits that profile, or if there's somebody in the trade market that we go after. But those are the kind of players I expect to see. I think our pitching is going to be great in 2023. To Brian's point, it's going to be very hard for the bullpen to be what it was last year, even with the same guys, because there's a reason those guys are bullpen pitchers, not 90% of the time. But our starting rotation should be a little bit better because all those guys are going to have another year of experience. All of our young pitchers, Luis Garcia, Jose Urquidy, Kristen Javier, who people are talking about being a dark horse for Cy Young next year. And then Fromber, who every year gets just a little bit more mature and a little bit better and a little bit more badass. You brought up Hunter Brown. A great thing about Hunter Brown is he could have an okay season and it would be all right because he's going to be the swing guy if he's in Houston. He's going to get a spot start every now and then. If we go to a 6-man rotation, he'll get his share of starts, but he doesn't have to be Justin Verlander because we have 5 other guys who are going to be much better than league average.
Well, and we'll obviously get to the rotation, because we'll have to have something to talk about before spring training starts. But I really actually hope to see Brown in the rotation, not as a swing guy. But okay, so now I want to get to the conversation that I think might get a little spicy. I don't know. So one of the things, Brian, before you joined the show, Andy and I had painted this picture of how Major League Baseball and therefore the media have always sort of treated the Astros as a whipping boy in some way, shape, or form, to the point that we had Yankee fans emailing us saying like, okay, I believe it now. You guys actually are the whipping boy of Major League Baseball. And it seemed to happen again, guys, when Keith Law went out of his way to write an article about how the Astros screwed up signing such an old player and yet gave a pass to just about every other team that also signed old players for longer contracts. Andy, to start with you on this, where do you sit with, or what is your thought process on just how the national media continues to sort of take that narrative and run with it?
I am sure I'm about to get refuted in my opinion, but my opinion is that most of the Major League Baseball writers, the big guys, Keith Law, Nightingale, Rosenthal, maybe a little bit less to his extent, but are still somewhat butthurt, and maybe are the most butthurt group of people, constituents of Major League Baseball when it comes to the 2017 issue. They seem to be the ones who carried the torch and have driven a lot of the narrative for fans that otherwise could have reasonably come to the conclusion that the Astros got caught doing what a lot of other teams were attempting to do. And they also seem to carry this torch that the Astros didn't really receive a punishment. So since then, we've seen a lot of articles about the Astros, because you get clicks if you put Astros in the headlines since 2017 or since 2020. And B, because everything is through that lens of this is a shady organization. And sometimes it just feels like that's what we continue to do. So if you can't prove that they're shady, well, they're probably dumb. So now dumb is where we've gotten to because we've fired James Click with no apparent reason. Jim Crane is now Jerry Jones. The world is set on fire, and we're signing stupid contracts to old players. That's kind of and yes, I am a reactionary, hair on fire person sometimes with this stuff, but that's where it feels sitting like in Houston, Texas, because that's the coverage I'm seeing.
All right, before we get to Rob, that's right, Brian, we're going to make you wait. That's how you do it in the movie business. I do want to, Andy and I again had painted the picture of a big reason why we think the media carried the torch so hard on this particular story had as much to do with the fact that it was members of their industry that were punished or that were insulted by Brian Taubman before we even in the ALCS locker room, that famous moment. So, Rob, just you talk a little bit about national coverage.
I need to offer a correction here as a Brian. He's Brandon Taubman. I'm not taking credit for the first name there.
Sorry.
Well, it wasn't just Brandon Taubman. It was the idea that Jeff Lunau had effectively shut out the media and most of the sources by getting rid of the scouts. That was another big part of some of the disdain that the national media had for the Lunau regime, at least.
Okay, Rob.
I'm unfamiliar with the story you're talking about, actually. I didn't know somebody was bad mouthing our signing of Abreu.
Yeah, the Athletic had a big deal about it. We'll let Brian fill in some context and then his opinion, and then we'll circle back.
Yeah. So Keith Law was very negative about this, and there were two premises to that. It's too long a third year, which is, the biggest worry I had in writing about it, and that you're better off at first base just finding at first base is a place where you can find a guy, which I think is a critical bit of context on, it's different to sign Jacob deGrom, who's the best pitcher in the world, to 5 years, even if the 5 years are really risky versus this year. I disagree with Law. You saw what I wrote, which is that, hey, there are big worries about the third year, but clearly as a win now move, signing Abreu makes a lot of sense. I will also note here that Ben Clemens of Fangraphs not only wrote a article that he put the headline on was the Abreu signing fits the Astros like a glove. He wrote a second article positive about it, thinking about we tend to use these dollars per war thing, but there's also this sort of qualitative element of hey, the Astros should get better right now because they're a really good team. And it was, something sort of affected him in thinking about, hey, I need to broadly think more differently about this, and the Abreu signing was a window into that. So
right, I'm going to push back on one part of that.
Right?
I'm going to push back just on one part of that before you finish your answer.
Okay.
I don't know that we could call Fangraphs is not read by everyone. Casuals read The Athletic. So I think that's part of the issue is Fangraphs is read by guys like us who are super interested in this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Fangraphs are read by people who have the account because they're a Cowboys fan and they run across the article.
The Athletic,
Brian. Sorry, The Athletic. What did I say?
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I recommend people read. If people want to know more about baseball, read Fangraphs. It's excellent, and they have fine coffee mugs as well. But two, I bring that up to say that there were negatives on this here. There were positives on it. There was a mix of emotions. There was a mix of reactions to it among national guys. In general, you're absolutely right that people didn't like Jeff Luhnow, for one. Hey, people who do new stuff always get pushed back on, period, regardless of what that is. Sometimes it's fair, sometimes it's not. The apex of that was in 2014, where everything seemed to be going wrong. And fortunately for all of us, the Astros got better in 2015, and those type of stories went away. But as Andy says, Luhnow, he took away the people who leak and then made it very clear inside the Astros front office, you don't leak to the media at all. And, I think that is a good strategy for how to run your organization and a bad strategy for media relations, which is the cost of doing things, cost of doing things in a productive way. Luhnow also, in particular, doesn't care about his reputation. Crane doesn't care about it that much. That, for the most part, is a positive for both of them because, one of my big criticisms of Drayton McClain back in the day is he cared deeply, deeply, deeply about public relations, and he used that to cover up from, say, not hiring a good GM.
Tim Papura disagrees with you, sir.
I'm sure he does. And Ed Wade cheers out there for,
I have one more topic I want to hit to you, but I'll give you a chance to rebut if you have a rebuttal.
I don't know that I need to rebut. I mean, I don't disagree with what Brian's saying. Some of this is emotional, but as long as I've been an Astros fan, we've been a second-class franchise. And some of that is certainly by our own creation. I mean, we were a franchise that at one point was owned by Ford Motor Credit because Judge Rojas couldn't pay his bills. And then you had John McMullen, who made a splash by signing Nolan Ryan and then made another splash by deciding he was done in 1988. We know the rest of that story. Then you have Drayton McClain come in. And Drayton McClain knelt at the knee of Bud Selig way too often. And so you get hurricane games in Milwaukee because that's a neutral site against the Cubs somehow in a pennant race. You get a number of examples that we've got on the show that I know we're kind of a little pressed for time right now. And so a lot of what happened in January of 2020 for longtime Astros fans like me felt like an extension of that. And then you see that the media, Buster Olney comes to mind, just hasn't let that narrative go. And even as we were winning the World Series, you started seeing articles by people like Olney, like, maybe it's time to think of the Astros as a legitimate franchise. Well, no shit. We've been a legitimate franchise since 1962.
Right. So I think if we take it in Brian's sort of narrow focus of this story, I think he's 100% correct. I think we were looking at it from this, here's one more example of a history of examples. All right, Rob, I don't know if you have a follow-up before we get to our last question.
Well, thank you. I did want to add something to that. So if anybody criticized the signing of Abreu, first of all, I'm a huge Yuli Gurriel fan. And of course I wanted him back. But when I saw Abreu's on-base percentage, batting average, I didn't even care about the home runs. I mean, we improved our lineup in my mind. Our pitching staff, maybe a little less without JV, but like I said, we can get to the World Series without him. But I like it. I don't know why anyone would criticize it. I like it a lot.
All right, last question. And did somebody want to chime in?
All right, I don't even have a problem with the criticism from Keith Law on that topic. It's that he's gone radio silent on all these other deals. Brandon Nimmo for 8 years is kind of a ridiculous deal. Jacob deGrom for 5 years with his health history in the last 2 seasons is kind of a ridiculous deal. But you're seeing articles now about, did the Rangers just buy themselves a World Series berth? Well, no, they didn't. Texas Monthly is not a sports source by any means, but why you would even push that article out, I have no earthly idea, because, okay, great, now they have 3 players. They need 23 more.
No one can buy a World Series spot anyway. The playoffs are a crapshoot, so you should discount anyone who writes headlines like that about baseball, because there's probably a better analysis. Probably a better analysis of the Cowboys or the Aggies.
I'd like to buy a Super Bowl, but all right, last question. We'll start with Rob on this one. We've had a lot of money going out during free agency, particularly following 3 years where the market has been really suppressed, maybe even longer than 3 years. Does this mean we can finally put to bed when owners cry poor? Because it certainly looks like even teams like the Rangers that shouldn't be spending money right now and traditionally don't spend money are. And like we talked about, Rob, the Mets with, I think they'll finish at somewhere around $500 million in payroll.
Because Steve Cohen doesn't give a, I mean, he does not care.
His tax thing right now is $90 million bucks.
Hold on, is Steve Cohen going to have to sell any of his art that he's bought for over $100 million?
Probably not.
Okay. I mean,
I think we're okay here. So I think the Cohen heirs are okay.
Rob, what do you think?
The story that I read, it said it was $70 million that they pay in taxes, but 70, 90, what's the big deal to him, right?
Right.
But I saw something, they were comparing their tax penalties is more than like 3 other Major League Baseball teams' entire payroll.
Yeah, more than the Royals, more than the Pirates, and then one other team.
Was it the Guardians?
And there's I don't think there's a lot of other teams that can spend money like that.
Right.
So they were in that article, I believe they were hinting at maybe making some type of salary cap to even things out. But you have Major League Baseball teams down at the bottom that are going to stay there because they're not going to spend money like that. And they're fine with it, I guess.
Andy, just looking at the landscape, though, it does seem like more teams than we've seen in previous years are spending.
It's normal, maybe not at this level, but we're talking $2022 versus $2,000, which I think is, we have a new labor agreement. And so with a new labor agreement, you have a certain amount of labor certainty for a period of time that makes owners more comfortable. It's the same reason that people get happy and the stock market goes up. You've got some certainty, you have fewer variables that you have to deal with, you know what the labor situation is, so it's easier for owners to justify in their minds bigger contracts for longer terms. You'll see at the end of this window, when we get closer to the renegotiation of a CBA down the road, that owners will start tightening up again and contracts will get shorter. That's just the nature of how this typically ebbs and flows. We're just at kind of a happy period right now where all the owners just split $30 billion or whatever they got for selling off the last piece of that network. And so you also have people like Steve Cohen who are changing some of the thought processes in the game. Because he is a guy with just FU money coming out his ass and does not care. We're talking about the taxes he's paying. He also had to pay a giant posting fee to get Senga to sign yesterday. So that's another several $1 million and the tens of millions of dollars going to a Japanese club. He's not seeing any benefit of that other than the ability to sign Senga. And you've got some owners who are willing to do that. Not a lot. Maybe it's just Steve Cohen right now, but eventually Hal Steinbrenner will get shamed into participating. Eventually, the Dodgers will not care about their taxes for a couple of years. So you're kind of just pulling the rest of the market along, and Steve Cohen's driving a lot of that. We're not talking about the Mets today, but I think that's a big part of it. But I think the labor certainty piece makes it a lot easier to sign those checks for some of the owners. But again, to Rob's point, you still have the Pirates and the Marlins and the Royals who are going to struggle, get by with a $50 million payroll and wonder why nobody shows up in their park come August.
I'll add 2 points to what Andy said. One is, and this is just an extension of what he said, apparently there were $11 billion of revenue in the sport last year, according to Rob Manfred. So that probably means there are $22 billion. Mm-hmm. And so, hey, those Apple TV games that we hated, Apple paid him money. Those Peacock games we never saw, Peacock paid him money. NBC paid him money. There were lots of there are more avenues, and they're putting more stuff on like advertising. They're finding more revenue sources. So they got the money. And 2 is, and this is a point we can tie back to James's lovely banner behind him. You remember our opponent in the World Series was the Phillies. And the Phillies got to the World Series not by doing what the Astros and Dodgers and other teams have done, which is by developing a lot of their own players and making them good. They got there by saying, we're just going to spend our way into, hopefully, in this case, it was 87 wins. It was the last playoff spot. They got hot in October. They got all those media people to say what Andy was talking about. It's like they're a team of destiny, which doesn't exist, but they're a team of destiny. And so other teams, particularly the Padres and Rangers, have seen that and said, well, if they can buy their way to 87 wins in a playoff spot, maybe we can do the same. So you see more teams doing this. And the Phillies said, I'm not letting you take my playoff spot. They went out and spent 11 years for Trey Turner. Trey Turner will be a 41-year-old guy with a walker running around the middle infield in Philadelphia. But for right now, it makes them more likely to go to the playoffs next year. That is an overall good thing for the sport. It's a challenge for the Astros, as we talked about with the 5-year rule, but it is overall a good thing for the sport. I'm very happy to see it.
And also, just to add one more point to that, the patches that we're all going to hate on the jerseys that are coming next season are estimated to earn about $300 million for clubs. So the first one was in Boston with Massachusetts Bank or insurance company. Everybody's going to have one of those. That's more advertising, which is more dollars, which if you get $17 million out of that, you just paid for one of your free agents. I mean, it is. This
is why the Pirates should sign Carlos Correa. That's $30 million they've got sitting around that they can give to Carlos Correa.
And they're going to have Heinz on their sleeve, and it's going to be ketchup one day, mustard the other. Should just be mustard if they're doing it right. But
what will the Astros be? HEB?
I don't know if HEB has that kind of bucks.
Whataburger.
Oh. I think it'll be one of those big oil companies that you see as one of the neighborhood partners signs out in the outfield.
Hello, Halliburton. All right, so Rob, the tradition around here is we will end the show with a final thought and then a hearty Go Astros. And so I'm going to let the other two guys go first. You will wrap us up then. But this has been Go Astros. We've been very excited to have Rob here. My final thought, I think, is the one thing I wonder is, will I feel as attached to Jose Altuve when he retires as I do to Biggio and Bagwell, who were the kind of heroes of my youth? I guess we'll figure that out. Go Astros.
We are still I'm so ready for baseball season to get here because I'm really tired of talking about hot stove stuff this off season. Get back to talking about a good team. Go Astros.
2 things. One, I'm hoping the market for Sean Murphy really gets low and we get back in that. And 2, I want to just take a second to offer some prayers to Mike Leach and his family. Go Astros.
My final thought is I believe the Astros still have the team to win it all next year. They're still going to be the most hated team, but now they have some respect on their name, and I'm looking forward to next season because I don't really watch football.
I gotta love that. And as we wrap up,
Go Astros.
And I thanks. And I agree. And also want to echo Andy's statement about Mike Leach. He's a Texas football legend at this point, and a regular appearing character on Friday Night Lights. So but our thoughts and prayers in the realest sense go out to his family.